Hanania Show is brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News Newspaper, the Middle East's leading English language publication, with print and online editions in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, France, Japan, Pakistan, England, and the United States. Listen to live radio every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern in Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York, and Ontario, Canada. Or watch the live broadcast on Facebook.com/Arab News. The Ray Hanania Show is rebroadcast in Chicago at 12 noon on Thursday. For more information on the radio stations, live Facebook broadcast, and podcasts, visit ArabNews.com. And now, here's your host, columnist and U.S. Special Correspondent for Arab News, Ray Hanania.
And it's Wednesday, September 14, 2022, and I am your host, Ray Hanania. We're going to focus on the 77th Annual United Nations General Assembly, which begins this week and continues through the end of September. Our first guest is going to be in segment one, Ephrem Kossaify, my journalism colleague and the UN correspondent for Arab News. He'll be talking with us about what to expect in the upcoming 2 weeks at the United Nations. In segment two, we'll speak with Zahar Sahlul, president of MedGlobal, which provides healthcare and medical services to refugees around the world. We'll talk about what he hopes the UN can do to help the refugee crisis. And in segment three, we'll speak with Paulina Kubiak, the spokesperson for the new president of the UN General Assembly, Csaba Kőrösi, who takes the helm from outgoing president Abdulla Shahid. We'll discuss these issues that the UN is expected to address during the session during the next 2 weeks. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have our first interview with Ephrem Kossaify. We'll be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com. News that matters to you.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
Our first guest today is Ephrem Kossaify. He's the Arab News UN correspondent, talking with us about what to expect in the upcoming 2 weeks at the United Nations General Assembly's 77th session. Welcome to the show, Ephraim. So good to see you.
So good to see you, Ray. I love being on your show.
What's so special about this week and next week at the United Nations?
Ray, it's been called so many things. It's the biggest world meeting. It's been called the Oscars of diplomacy. It's been called the World Cup of diplomacy. But basically, this is a time when everything that the UN works for is sort of like converges into these 2 weeks, and there's a tremendous focus on the main issues that preoccupy UN officials all around the world. It's also a week where all world leaders come here also to give speeches and to conduct many bilateral meetings, which sometimes we get some information about what they talk about, but most of the time it remains really concealed and off limits to journalists. There's a lot going on, but what's important about this year is it's really highlighting so many multilateral problems. The problems and the challenges of the world have never been so interconnected. We saw how a war between Russia and Ukraine has led in a matter of a couple of months to famine knocking on the door of Somalia, all the way in Western, Africa. The world is so interconnected, and the main motto of the UN, we know it's multilateralism and the importance of multilateral work, and the UN has called on world leaders to look around them, to be very cognizant of all the challenges of the world, and to come with this spirit, with this attitude that we're going to come together to try and solve some of them.
Next week, I think, is like a big week because that's the celebrity week when all the presidents, the prime ministers, the kings and royalty, they'll all get up and speak. Is it different every year, or do you hear the same messages from some of these speakers who come and talk?
It's interesting, Ray, because people are waiting to hear what President Putin has to say, what President Biden has to say, but really what remains after everything is over are speeches from the least likely people to have a big impact on the audience. For example, last year nobody talked about after Anga about Biden or Putin or Bolsonaro or those big leaders, but everyone was talking about the Prime Minister of Barbados, for example, because she brought so much passion into her speech, and she used the Bob Marley song to goad world leaders to just stand up, get up, fight for the rights of people. And that was really the highlight of last year. And throughout history, you can really count on one hand the speeches that left a trace in people's memory, including Gaddafi when he was here, the former Libyan dictator, the slain one. And you have Che Guevara speech and Fidel Castro speech. Those are the speeches really that stayed. But of course, everyone will also be waiting to see what Volodymyr Zelensky will say this year.
One of the big interesting things that they're talking about is whether the president of Iran, Raisi, will be allowed into the U.S. Now, as I understand it, technically the U.S. can't stop anybody from coming, but I expect that would be a big focus of protests. Do we know anything about that yet, or is that still up in the air?
I was checking the list of speakers. They keep updating it. It's not really final yet, but on the list of speakers, they tell you sort of who's coming, head of government or prime minister or head of state or a ministerial level representation. And apparently Raisi is coming. So I suspect he was already allowed. But on the subject of granting visas and all the protocols that have to do with the host country, like you're totally right about that. But there has been an issue a couple of weeks ago with the Russian mission, where apparently 54 diplomats applied for visas, and last time I heard they did not get it. And there was the head of mission, the permanent representative of Russia, who said that if this really happens, if we don't get visas, then you should start saying goodbye to the UN. Then the UN is over.
So Ephraim, I know that the UN is one giant organization with offices all over the world, but what are the differences between what we're seeing this week, the General Assembly, and the other arm, which is the Security Council?
The Security Council is the most powerful body of the United Nations. It's the body that is tasked with maintaining international peace and security. It's the body that is also tasked with preventing conflict all over the world. But as you know, the body has 5 permanent members, and those permanent members have the power of the veto. And although 2 of those members, like France and Britain, have forfeited the veto from 30 years ago, as we saw this year, the veto has been used by Russia again. So the Security Council this year has been thrown into this huge existential crisis about, what kind of effect can it have on the world if, for the first time, like in years, you have a member of the Security Council, which is the body, as I said, tasked with international peace and security, wage a war on another country and use the veto to block any reaction from the members of the council. But so what happened this year is when that stalemate at the Security Council happened, the General Assembly stepped in and called for a very rare session where you had almost all members were present, except maybe Syria, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. And they all, 141 nations, condemned the Russian aggression on Ukraine, which was considered a huge success for the General Assembly, in terms of like the role that it could play when the Security Council is not up to the level. Yeah.
Isn't it true though that a security resolution has the impact of almost law? If they agree on something, it's like a law. The General Assembly, on the other hand, I think, right, those resolutions are advisory. They're really kind of, this is how we feel. But there's nothing that says you must do what this says, correct?
Absolutely. And one of the talking points when the UN talks about reforming the Security Council, reforming the UN system, is precisely about that. Could we give the General Assembly some more power? Could we make its resolution a bit more binding to member states? This is a big question too, and I have to add that Security Council reforms and UN reforms in general are always a very hot topic. They always come into focus also during UNGA, and especially so this year.
And I know that in the beginning you talked about some of the big issues. Obviously, every year we do hear about Israel and Palestine. We're going to hear about the Ukraine and Russia. We may hear about Iraq and Afghanistan, but what else is there?
You have climate change. The Secretary General just came back from Pakistan, and I think that's very telling of where the UN priorities are. We all have been watching the tragedy, the climate tragedy, or the climate carnage, where a glacier melts in the Himalayas, and then you have a whole country, a third of one country flooding, and 1,000 people dying, and $30 billion in damages, for a country that produces the least amount of greenhouse gases in the world. And with it comes this question also of who should fund climate humanitarian responses and climate change bills, and shouldn't it be the countries that are responsible for it? And why should a country like Pakistan shoulder the bill on top of that as well? So you have this story of climate that's, it's not really just one country anymore. And as Antonio Guterres said, today it's Pakistan, tomorrow it's going to be your country. Like now there is no doubt about that we are, on that track, that if nothing is done about climate, we're going to see more and more tragedies like that. You also have a lot of, in the world today, Ray, 200 million people are on the move in the world. And the UN High Commissioner for Refugees has also been touring the world, talking to governments, trying to see how we can accommodate these people on the move, what to give them, who can fund these operations, how to tackle the root causes of migration. That's a huge problem, 200 million. Then you have also the drastic underfunding in UN humanitarian responses everywhere. When the Ukrainian war started, Western officials told UN officials that we're going to give money to Ukraine, but it's separate than the money we're allocating to Syria and Somalia and all the other, hotspots of humanitarian crisis in the world. But then that didn't happen. while the Ukrainian operation is fully funded, almost non-stop for the past 6 months, there's been a drastic underfunding in Somalia, in Sudan, in Syria, in Yemen, everywhere really. And so the UN is trying to hammer the message home that it's not only the Ukrainians who are fleeing war and tragedies, everyone who flees needs help. And, so that's another main message. And then last but definitely not least, is the women issues again and again. There's another report that came last week as part of, monitoring the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals and the goal that has to do with women equality all over the world. And we really saw shocking numbers. For example, if at the current pace, we're going to need 300 years to achieve equality, gender equality in the legal systems, for example, across the world. Imagine. So all the SDGs really have suffered the setback this year on all levels. The energy.
Well, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you about the SDGs. I think that's what Sustainable Development Goals. Yes. They're like 17 big ones, right? That the UN addresses every year, or this is something they've been doing for a number of years, all the way for the next 8 years, right?
Yes, since 2015, 7 years. It's going to be 8 years soon, yes. And the goal is to reach all these 17 goals, which include, for example, clean energy for all, education for all. It's all for all, eradication of poverty for all. And supposedly we were supposed to reach all those goals in 2030. But I just told you they just monitored the progress on gender equality level. And it's not just we're not going to meet it in 2030. We're going to need 300 years if we continue
to get there.
To get the legal systems, equal.
I want to thank you, Ephraim, my friend Ephraim Kosafi, a fellow journalist. He is the UN correspondent for Arab News. Really, thank you for taking the time to join us. I know how tough it is. You got things happening there every day. I don't envy you, but I'm glad that you're there to help represent us because you do a great job. Thank you, Ephraim.
It's a huge pleasure and a huge honor. Thank you, Ray.
And that was our guest, Ephraim Kosafi, the UN correspondent for Arab News, giving us kind of just an intro overview of what to expect at the UN. He's going to join us next week, and we'll look at some of the big speeches that'll be presented next week. And the following week, he'll join us again, and we'll look back at all the big events at the United Nations to give us some context. I'm waiting for our next guest, Zahar Sahlul, the president of Med Global, who provides healthcare and medical services to refugees around the world. We're going to talk with him as soon as he connects. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, hopefully we will be talking with him. Later, we also have a interview pre-taped with Paulina Kubiak, spokesperson for the new president of the General Assembly, Csaba Kőrösi, who takes the helm from outgoing President Abdulla Shahid. I'm Ray Hanania. We're going to be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Live performances, concerts, music festivals, and hot jazz. Moments like these are made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. So let's work together to continue to be safe and protect each other. Keep those concerts going. Keep the togetherness going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date. To find your vaccine and learn more, visit michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Enjoy the first Syrian-style cuisine in Michigan. At Damas Cuisine and Catering, you'll find a wide selection of Syrian foods and sweets in our menu, like frikeh, hoisin, grape leaves with steak, mishawi platter, hot mahashi, char-grilled kebab, shawarma, and much more. Get super fast delivery from Damas Cuisine and Catering right to your door. Order online at damascuisine.com/menu and track your order live. Damas Cuisine and Catering, 28841 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Call 248-987-4985.
And welcome back to the Ray Hanania Show here at WNZK AM 690, broadcasting in Detroit and Washington, D.C., and rebroadcasting tomorrow. I think we're waiting for our next guest, Zahar Sahlul from Med Global, to zoom in, but I think what we'll do is let's go ahead and do our interview that we did with Paulina Kubiak, who is the spokesperson for the UN, the new United Nations president. Let's go ahead and do that and get that one started. Hang on here 1 second. And of course, there's always a little snag there, right? There it is. Okay. And I don't know why it's not coming up. It worked okay. Oh my gosh. I'm going to ask Mike at the studio to play our next set of ads, if you don't mind, Mike. Well, I figure out why this story isn't popping up. I got it. We played it. I tested it, and it's phenomenal. So I want to make sure we do this. Let me just try one more time. And let's see, maybe it'll come up now. Oh, there it is. Okay, we got it. Never mind. Let's go ahead with this ad with our next guest, Paulina Kubiak. Welcome, Paulina Kubiak, the spokesperson for the new president of the General Assembly, Csaba Kőrösi, who takes the helm from outgoing President Abdulla Shahid. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ray. Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your involvement with the UN. I know you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, I've been with the United Nations for about 15 years. I am actually one of the journalists within the UN. I work for UN News. So it's a great privilege to be a spokesperson here. And actually, because you're from Chicago, that's where I grew up. I went to University of Illinois, and my family still lives in the suburbs. So it's another pleasure to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about the new president of the UN, and if you want to say a few words about the past president, that would be great.
Sure. So Csaba Kőrösi officially began this week. He is a Hungarian diplomat. He has decades of experience in diplomacy and sustainable development. He's pushing for multilingualism. He speaks Arabic, French, Russian, and of course English and Hungarian.
Wow.
Very, very inspiring. And he's deeply passionate about the General Assembly being effective, delivering for the 8 billion people out there. This is, his presidency, I think, is a little bit more pragmatic. We can expect that from him. And that's a little bit in contrast with the previous president, President Abdulla Shahid, who had the presidency of hope. Both presidents are leading the General Assembly during very, very chaotic, very turbulent times. I think both have and had their work cut out for them. So it's very exciting to start the 77th session.
Well, you said Shahid had the presidency of hope. Is there a description for Mr. Kőrösi's presidency?
Yeah, his motto is solutions through solidarity, sustainability, and science. And to my recollection, he is the first president of the General Assembly to include science in his motto. He's very big on looking to scientists, looking to evidence to help make decisions that that obviously the decisions that the General Assembly makes, the resolutions that it makes, it impacts people on the ground. And so he wants those to be rooted in science. He wants scientists to be able to say, look, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. So it's very practical, real information that, that can't be argued with. And then solutions, obviously, there's a lot of talk at the General Assembly. That's kind of what the UN is known for. It's talking. And he's really pushing for solutions, for something to come out of this. We have these resolutions, have these agreements, but what's actually coming from these to impact the people on the ground? Solidarity, well, I think COVID, more than anything, has shown us that what happens in one part of the world really impacts all of us. So there's that push for member states to come together, to build trust, to work together for the good of the people and the planet. And that brings me to sustainability then. What kind of a future do we want to have for our kids? What kind of future do we want to have? Sustainability and really making decisions and taking actions for sustainability. So that would be the motto for him and for the 77th presidency.
And I know that we were talking about sustainable development goals. There are a lot of them, and I'm assuming, my next question was going to be, what can the world expect from the UN session, the General Assembly session this year? I assume it's going to be part of that sustainability program that they've outlined in much detail.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of SDGs. There are 17 of them. And they're all designed, again, to make the world a better place for people, for the environment, for animals, for everything too. Every year, heads of state, heads of government, ministers, they all come together and they talk about what they've done in connection with the SDGs. And there's always a big SDG moment at the start of the week. So that would be, let me look at my calendar. I'm looking now. That would be Monday, the 19th, to remind people that these SDGs are around and the fact that everything is interconnected, right? If we lose a biodiversity, that impacts us. If our kids, for example, because of COVID, not as many kids were able to go to schools, and so reading levels are suffering. Again, everything is interconnected. So it's a reminder. It's a reminder of that. And we do expect the SDGs to be front line, as they always are during the GA. The overall theme for this assembly is a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. And again, the SDGs are going to be a big part of that. COVID, climate change, situation in Ukraine, concerns about global economy, all of that, again, coming together at UNGA, at the GA.
And I know one of the big focuses, of course, will be next week, I think, when we hear the presidents and the prime ministers and the kings and representatives of all the countries speak. Is there a clash between that? It seems like each person brings their own issue to the General Assembly. How hard is it to mesh what they want done with the SDGs, for example, the goals of the UN?
Well, but you know what? I think that's the beauty of the General Assembly, right? The General Assembly is really the people's house. It's where every single member state, every single government has the opportunity to speak and be heard. And it doesn't matter if you're a tiny island off in the Pacific or if you're a big country such as the United States. Everyone has just as much say. And unlike the Security Council, there's no veto. So it's really, as I said, the people's house. In terms of the speeches, it's a great opportunity for each country to come and really talk about what are the challenges, what are the priorities, what are they doing, and it's working for them, for their country. and you begin to kind of see patterns and themes. Maybe the small islands, the speakers from the small islands will talk about some of the commonalities, and some of the same solutions, or perhaps some of the same problems that they face. Whereas other countries that maybe don't have access to that sea will also, there'll be common threads throughout. And again, that's all connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's always great to hear what countries are doing right now, or what's worked, rather than what they're planning to do.
What are some of the issues that they should also be looking at and not miss?
On the 20th of September, so the first day of the big speeches, is going to be a meeting of the UNGA platform of women leaders. Oh. And it's going to be an opportunity for all the women heads of state and heads of government to come together and discuss issues such as climate change, such as situation in Ukraine. And I think this will also highlight the fact that we actually don't have that many women in those top leadership positions. I think at the UNGA last year, and I'll have to check my notes, it was only 13 who spoke. And according to UN Women, right, as of September last year, there were only 24 women heads of state and heads of government. So I think that event is going to be also spotlighting on the need for us to, it's 2022. We really need more women represented in these positions. I think that's, yeah, thanks, Ray. So I think that might be something that people will talk about as well. The big education event, that's something that the Secretary General's office is planning, and that's going to come on that Monday prior, so the 19th. There might be something that comes out of that, because, education impacts everybody. As I said before, during COVID, we all know now that reading levels, math levels just deteriorated. So I think this will be a great opportunity to kind of reassess and talk about what has worked, what hasn't, and make pledges. So maybe there'll be something that comes out of that. And at the very least, I would like people to know that education is a topic that's being talked about at the highest levels of, international politics. I'm just looking at my schedule now in terms of what else might be of interest. On Wednesday, the 21st, there will be an event looking at minorities, and it has a really long name. So excuse me, I'm going to look at my paper and I'm going to read it out because I don't remember it. So this event is going to be the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National or Ethnic, Religious, and Linguistic Minorities. And Nobel laureate Nadia Murad is going to be speaking at this. If that name obviously sounds familiar to you, if It doesn't to some listeners, Nadia Murad has been very outspoken. She is a Yazidi, a member of the Yazidi community who was attacked by ISIS and has a very horrific tale, and came out of this and has been very strong proponent of justice for survivors of sexual abuse. And
I like the idea of bringing the women in the first event that you mentioned that they're going to present. Has this been done before in such a formal way at the opening of a UN, where all these women will get together and really kind of assert themselves? You mentioned, I think, 24 out of 193 members of the UN? Yeah,
it's crazy, isn't it?
We need more.
It should be more.
It is. It
should be more. Yeah, I think it might be like 26, because I think there's some countries who might have, a president and a prime minister. But yeah, it's 24 countries. I mean, it's insane. So yeah, the platform that is going to be meeting this year actually comes out of a meeting held last year. So it's something that the president of the General Assembly at the time, Abdulla Shahid, he's been very supportive of gender equality. He made sure that his office here in the presidency was 50%, men and women. It actually ended up being like 54%. He said, listen, I'm not going to sit on any panel where women aren't included, and they're at least half. So this has definitely been his issue. So last year he had a meeting with UN Women and with a couple of heads of state, And they said this might be something that we might want to continue. It'll be interesting. Obviously, the funeral for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth is going to probably impact who can arrive on time, who can't. Right. But I think it'll still be a really good event.
Yeah, and I think that's phenomenal that they're going to do that. And normally, when I've only covered the UN one time, it was many years ago, and Ephrem Kossaify, who is my colleague at Arab News, now covers it. And he does a great job of reporting on it. I always assume that the opening session is always just a stage setter. Here's what we're going to be doing. These are what the issues are. It sounds like even inserting the women the way that they're doing it this year is actually an action item that's being taken, not just saying, hey, we're going to do this. They're actually doing it. Will there be a lot of actions taken during the next 2 weeks?
I see what you mean, because again, it's this idea of speeches, right? Member states come forth and they say in their speeches, we're planning to do this, or we're going to do this. And it's so interesting. I love that you brought up this issue, because one of the things that I always like to see is, well, what happens from that speech that you give in this September to the speech that you give in September of next year? Right. What actually happens on the ground? Right. And will there be a lot of actions taken? Well, there might be pledges taken, like in the education event and others, but I think a lot of what happens at UNGA especially is what happens behind closed doors, because all these people that come here, they have bilateral meetings, they have these discussions, they go to side events, they and that's when a lot of the business gets done that you and I are not privy to.
I know the UN addresses the issue of refugees, correct? Is there any focus on that this year?
There is not a high-level event that the President of the General Assembly is planning to deal with refugees. UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency, is leading that as well.
Is there anything else that maybe I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention?
Again, I think it will be interesting to hear what is said about climate action. Climate change is everywhere, and particularly given the flooding in Pakistan, I'll be watching to see what member states say about that.
Paulina, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Thanks so much.
And that was a very interesting interview that I did with Paulina Kubiak, who is the spokesperson for Csaba Kőrösi, who is the new president of the United Nations General Assembly. And I thought what was really fascinating about her discussion was the focus that they're putting. The former President Abdulla Shahid insisted that he would not attend meetings if there were no women at those meetings representing countries. I thought that was phenomenal. And Csaba Kőrösi, who is succeeding Abdulla Shahid as the UN president, has emphasized that it is a priority of his, that they will make it a priority to encourage more women to be speakers, more women to represent the countries and the issues. I think out of 193 countries, she said, represented at the UN, there are only 24 to 26 women that will be speaking. But that's grown over last year, and each year it grows. And I thought Ephraim Kosafi made a great point. Women, increasing the freedoms for women is one of the 17 SDGs, the sustainable goals for development goals for the United Nations. And unfortunately, they said it may take 300 years before women will be given equity and equitable treatment. So we had another guest, and unfortunately, he hasn't checked in. I know that he might be, he's a very busy person dealing with refugees, and he's been a guest before. So I know this wasn't intentional on his part, but we're going to try to track him down still. We got a few more minutes. Zahar Sahlul, who is the president of Med Global, talking about the refugee crisis. I mean, 6.5 million Syrian refugees, and only 3,795 have been settled in the United States. And all these other refugees, 11,411, were settled out of 125,000 coming out of Europe. There's a big refugee crisis. Is the United States doing enough? So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about that. We're going to take a quick break, and hopefully when we come back, we will have Zahar Sahlul of Med Global. He really is the expert on refugees and helping refugees. They go into war zones, they go into areas of conflict, and they provide medical assistance. So many of these, I think this was a spinoff of Doctors Without Borders, where they go there and they help the people. These doctors volunteer, and you really have to admire them for what they do, and it's a high pressure business. So why don't we take our final break, and when we come back, hopefully he will be on with us. If not, I'm going to give you some insight into what's coming up at the United Nations. I'm Ray Hanania. We'll take a break, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you. Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Albajid Katranji, and at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263.
And welcome back to the Ray Hanania Show. Unfortunately, we may not have our guests that I was hoping to, but like I said, this week, next week, the week after, we're going to be focusing on the United Nations. Next week, Ephraim Kosafi, the UN correspondent for Arab News, will join us to give us an update on when we do it on Wednesday on some of the big speeches that will be made. Next week is when all the big shots, the presidents, the kings, the prime ministers, they all give their speeches. And, I remember when Juliana Kubiak was speaking, the spokesperson for the UN president, she mentioned that some speeches by Cuba's Fidel Castro went on, I think, 90 minutes. And there was one that I think from Gaddafi, or no, it was Castro's, I think, that went on for like 5 hours, and Gaddafi's went on for like 90 minutes. Those are some long speeches. I'm not sure how much news, news stories are only about 800 to 1200 words. How do you take a 5-hour speech, from about Cuba and turn it into a simple news story? It's probably not that easy. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and it isn't really a priority, and not to say that it's not important. The UN takes this issue very seriously, the situation of refugees. But in 2021, there were more than 6.8 million refugees just from Syria alone, more than any other country in the world. And an estimated 5.8 million children needed humanitarian aid to meet their basic needs in Syria and in neighboring countries. 12 million people are food insecure, and that's an increase of 51%. It almost doubled since 2019. These are some of the facts that refugees face, and I'm still going to, even though he didn't make it so far to this segment of our show, I'm still going to try to bring him on because I think refugees are important. But we were talking with Paulina Kubiak, and she was talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's 17 sustainable development goals that have been identified by the United Nations. The first is to eliminate poverty. These are phenomenal goals that the UN takes on. The second one is to end hunger. Now, some people might think, wow, these are just wishful thinking. But, when you have a goal like that, you work toward it. The third one is good health and well-being. The fourth is quality education. The fifth is gender equality. We're seeing a lot of gender equality issues and sexist political talk in the United States in this upcoming election. Sadly, it's not really helping us get closer to gender equality because, unfortunately, gender equality and LGBTQ and gay rights and those issues are being hammered by the far right. And not being defended properly by the far left. Another one of the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has is achieving clean water and sanitation for every person in the world. Now, in many places, we take clean water and sanitation for granted. And, you get up in the morning, you just turn a little knob and you get this fresh water that you can shower and you can drink that water. It's so clean. But yet in other countries, they have to wait in long lines to go to a pipe where the water isn't sanitized. It doesn't have any of the chemical filters to filter out the bacteria, but that's all the water they get, and they only get it for a short period of time every day. So clean water and sanitation is a big issue that needs to be addressed. And I know Paulina Kubiak had said that these were going to be some of the big issues that the UN was going to address this year. There's also affordable and clean energy. That's number 7 on the list of 17 of these SDGs. 8 is decent work and economic growth. And I think that's fair. People should be paid a proper wage for the work that they do, and the work should be decent in the sense it should be clean, it should be safe, and they should be taken care of with basic benefits. And this leads to economic growth. The 9th is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. 10 is reduced inequalities. And I think that kind of ties in a little bit with gender equality, which was the number 5 on the SDGs. 11 is sustainable cities and communities. 12 is responsible consumption and production. And 13 is a big one because we hear a lot of this all over in many countries about climate change. We see the flooding going on. Ephraim Kosafi talked about some of the flooding that we've seen, I believe, in Asia. Flooding is becoming a serious problem. And it's amazing because, water floods and, it only goes to a certain level across the board. And yet some areas of the world seem to get flooding, and the flooding moves around the world. It's interesting what causes that. So climate action and climate change are really important. And then 14 is life below water. What are we doing to protect our sea life? Fish are a major staple of consumption for humans. And we have to keep the waters clean. We have to prevent the total eradication of some of these species of fish. And we have to protect some of the species of fish that are, these large mammals like whales. We can't destroy them completely where they totally disappear and become extinct. 15 is life on land. And this has to do with, the illegal poaching of animals, tigers, lions, elephants. It's terrible and tragic to see that happen, in today's world. It's not a good thing. And then, of course, there's the big institutions, peace, justice, and strong institutions in this world. We need organizations that are dedicated to bringing and achieving peace, justice, treating people fairly, and giving them the correct influence that they need to make things happen positively. And the final one, partnerships for the goals. And this is where they bring in organizations and people. They bring them in to help with all the different things to make them happen. And this is a tough little thing here. So we will be talking about this. And again, I'm always disappointed when, for some reason, and it does happen, this is live radio. It's set at a very specific time. And like I said, I had really hoped that we would have Zahar Sahlul with us. He's an expert. And I know that this is unintentional. A scheduling conflict came up. And but we will have him back. We'll organize it again. And we have other people that might join us to talk about the refugee issue, to see what's happening. But it's going to be very fascinating to see, to watch the UN this week, to listen to the speeches. I know that one of the big issues we're going to be exploring next week is the issue of, should the president of Iran, Raisi, be allowed to come to the United States? He's been accused of the worst war crimes. I don't know how many thousands of Iranian civilians he has been accused of killing, ordering their deaths, suppressing dissidents, suppressing free speech in Iran. It's a very tough country there. So we're going to be bringing a guest on next week to talk about that issue. And I know that every year at the United Nations, which I did cover a few years back, there are always protests, and the pro-democracy dissidents for Iran always come out in force at the United Nations, and they always have a big protest near the building, and it's huge. And as you know, New York comes under, kind of like a police, it's cordoned off, whole areas of like 2nd Street, all the way down, up and down, right around the UN. They're blocked off, and you have to have a pass to get through the guardrails there, so that you get to your hotel, to get to the UN. There's a lot of security, and that's a huge cost. The UN is probably the biggest organization that we have, and I know they do so many good things, to help the people of the world. I'm just looking up the United Nations speakers to see who's planned for UNGA 77, the United Nations General Assembly 77th year. And I'm just saying here, let me just bring on a friend, Nadia Gazzoul. And Nadia, how are you, Dr. Gazzoul? How are you? I think Nadia is a expert on the Syrian refugee crisis. She's an academic who worked at Aleppo University through 2011, then left for Jordan, and she works at the Paris Nanterre University. She's a Syrian activist who supports the Syrian refugees in caring for them and providing medical support there. So I don't know, Nadia, are you there? Dr. Gazzoul?
Yes, I am with you. Hello.
Oh, thank you. I know Layla, our producer, is so good. When she saw this opening, she wanted to get somebody in to fill the spots. Dr. Gazzoul, tell us, how bad is the situation for Syrian refugees?
First of all, good evening and good afternoon to you and to your listeners. Actually, I think it is never worse than the situation now through the 11 years, because we can hear the calls of the neighboring countries for the return back of the refugees. Even, one of the very important religious Christian figures in Lebanon, or before yesterday, mentioned that if they return back voluntarily, it will be a second war for them. Also in Turkey, now they are calling for the return of the refugees. We heard that today there is a security delegation, a Turkish security delegation, to negotiate with the regime leaders about the safe return of the Syrian refugees. Of course, it is not safe return, and it is not voluntarily return, but actually it is forceful return.
And how bad is the situation for Syrian refugees? How bad is it?
Yeah, actually, they don't stand the chances of getting jobs. They don't stand chances of getting financial aid from the UN. And we heard the calls of the UN Secretary Council, calling for increased aids because the number of refugees is increasing dramatically. And this applies to certain refugees, even, for example, in Syria neighboring countries, those who used to work now lost their works after Corona. There is economic crisis in all countries, and the first to lose their works are the refugees. We find that thousands are trying to flee again to Europe using the boats to die and to sink in the oceans and in the seas. And this happened this week, from Libya to Europe, where 147 Syrian refugees were lost or sank and died. So it is really very, very bad situation.
Do you think that we only have a couple minutes left, but do you think, and again, thank you for joining in. And I want to thank our co-producer, Layla El-Husseini, for reaching out to you because this is such an important topic. Do you think, Dr. Gazzoul, that the United Nations is doing enough to address the refugee crisis? And do you think countries like the United States, which has stated that they would help refugees, and I think Dr. Sahloul had posted a note that out of 6.5 million refugees, the U.S. has only taken in 3,795. That's terrible.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the number of the countries that host refugees, especially the U.S., is, dramatically decreasing. And the U.S., could do much, much better. They could open, their doors for regular and cooperate with the UNHCR in bringing refugees from neighboring countries, those who are living really in appalling conditions. Also, the UN maybe is trying to mobilize support, but we don't know whether it is for the UN or it is for the big powers who are now engaged with the Ukrainian war, and they are
spending. There's a distraction, in other words. That's caused a lot of pressure on refugees because there's so many refugees that have come out of that conflict. Final question. Shouldn't the United States be expected to do more than 3,795 refugees settled in the U.S. Out of 6.5 million? That number that's just for this year, and that's terrible. That's not even, it's so minuscule. It's embarrassing for the richest, most powerful country in the world that they can't do more for people that are in need.
Indeed, actually, the U.S. could do much better than this. Everybody could expect, for example, the U.S. to host no less than 1 million refugees, at least the minimum. And we should, we should consider, some of the European countries who host the refugees, and they were an additional value to the society, for example, in Germany. So refugees are not a burden on the economy of any country, especially a big country and continent like the US.
Right.
So we expect and we call for the opening the doors for more regular refugees delivery into the USA, because the situation is really getting very bad for them. At least we can save some lives from not dying while they are trying to flee the neighboring countries who are trying to force them to return back to the regime, and God knows what will happen next.
All right, Dr. Nadia Gazzoul, listen, thank you so much for joining us. and giving us this little brief update on the refugee crisis around the world. I'm Rayhan Ania. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and our producers, Mike Shubka and Layla El Hosseini, and everybody. We will be back next Wednesday talking about this issue focused on the UN. We'll see you then. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.